Welcome to the Environment and Sustainability Committee of the 16th of December. My name is Lewis Stark and I am the Chair. For those looking in, this meeting is being streamed live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel. We're also making a recording. The recording will be available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. Also, those looking in can find the agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting on the public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. We do have one public member today, and I've already checked that the lady is happy to be on camera. Can we keep background noise to a minimum, please? No mobile phones, and your laptop should be switched to silent so we get no dings, and that includes me as well. Because I'm often somebody who doesn't always do that. And please use the microphones when you are speaking. Fine, that's everything on that one. Now I'm going to introduce everyone in the room for those that are streaming in live online. Committee members on my right, I have Councillor Peabody, who's the Vice Chair. I have Councillor Thomas, Councillor Stone, Councillor Owens, Councillor Foxton and Councillor Mason. I'll just let you sit down. Okay. Have we got a microphone for Councillor Mason? Thanks. That's okay. Right, while we're getting a microphone for Councillor Mason, I'll introduce those non-committee members who are going to help us with our scrutiny today. We have Councillor Swinglehurst, Deputy Leader of the Council and the lead Cabinet Member on Environment. We have Richard Vaughan and Daniel Lennon, and we have Siobhan Riddle and Victoria Eaton. You're all most welcome. Thanks very much. I'll just wait for the clerk to come back. Right. Sorry about that for everyone looking in, but we are just having to adjust the microphone position for Councillor Mason so that he's able to participate in the debate. Okay. Clark, have we got any apologies for absence today?
Yes, we've received apologies from Councillor Robert Highfield.
Robert Highfield. And have we any substitutes?
Yes, Councillor John Stone is substituting for Robert Highfield.
And I'd like to welcome you, Councillor Stone, and thanks for substituting today. Most welcome. Right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Simon has got a question for you.
Oh yes, you're quite right. And we have a new member today, Councillor Foxton, and you're most welcome. And I understand you're going to be a permanent member of the committee now.
Thank you. Yes, that is true.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Declarations of interest. Does anyone get any declarations of interest for today's meeting? Then we come on to the minutes. It's quite some time since we had the last meeting of the SSC, in fact March, and not all of you will have been there. But can I ask, for those that were there, are you happy for me to sign off the minutes today with a show of hands? Thanks. I think that's fine. Do I need to sign them now? Yeah? Sign them afterwards, okay. Thank you. I understand we've had a question from a member of the public, and that's been published on the website, has it, Clark?
That's correct, yes, it's
Yes.
on the website.
I understand Mrs. Mora Biestra is here today. If you want to come forward and give us your supplement, thank you.
Please forgive my confusion around scrutiny, responsibilities and remit. On the basis of the answer received, this committee will not need to scrutinise the forthcoming local cycling, walking and wheeling infrastructure plan, as the Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee undertook this in September 2025, and I've provided a link for the papers and recommendations that they made. However, despite a public consultation on the Strategic Environment Assessment at the same time as the Local Transport Plan consultation, at the full council meeting in December 2025, the Local Transport Plan was only accompanied by a Strategic Environment Assessment non-technical summary dated April 2025. Given the absence of an up-to-date strategic environmental assessment to support the Council's adopted local transport plan, is the committee confident that the plan is compliant with the applicable statutory regulations for local transport plans, and despite the errors in the transport plan, requires no further scrutiny?
Thank you for your supplementary question, Mrs. Moraviestra. As regards the local cycling, wheeling, walking and infrastructure plan, the committee has for some time had it in their work programme to look at the plan against an earlier scrutiny that we did on active travel. There are 4 recommendations from that active travel scrutiny that was done in November 2024 that this committee will be looking at against that LC WIP plan, because the executive response to the 4 of those objectives were that our recommendations from that earlier scrutiny would be covered by LC WIP. So while we will not be looking at the plan itself, we'll be looking at how the plan addresses those earlier active travel recommendations, and that hopefully will happen in March.
Sorry, that my question was around the overarching local transport plan and the strategic environmental assessment because of transport and environment being in the remit.
But you mentioned LC WIP, and I wanted to explain what the committee was doing on the LC WIP. As for the strategic economic assessment...
No, I mentioned the LC WIP because of the saying that you couldn't review the local transport plan because that had been scrutinised by Connected Communities in June. I haven't seen when did you review the local transport plan?
No, the point I'm making is that the LC WIP is something that this committee is going to look at in the future. As for the strategic economic assessment, I've already got it in mind today to bring that forward under our work programme item later on to see if the committee wants to prioritise it as an item for scrutiny. I do accept that there was a lot of concern at full council on the 5th of December around the strategic economic assessment as regards the overarching local transport plan, and the committee can consider whether they want to prioritise that as a scrutiny item for their work programme going forward.
So, thank you for that. Can I just say it's not an economic assessment?
Oh, it's
a strategic environmental assessment. So I thought it came under the remit of the Environment and Sustainability
you're right.
Scrutiny
I'm sorry.
Committee,
Okay,
just in case it was an economic
strategic environment assessment. Yes, yes, that's me. I'm getting myself mixed up. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to item 6. Members of the council, any questions from them?
No questions received from members of the council.
We'll move on to item 7. I should apologise because I'm not 100% today. I'm struggling a bit, so, but we will continue. Our substantive topic item today is carbon neutral housing. We have 3 objectives that we want to look at, but before we go on, I would like to thank officers for the report and appendices. This has been an on-off item today, and I do think that their forbearance has been very valuable in terms of actually being able to produce something for the meeting that we're having now. The 3 objectives is to really consider and understand what we mean by carbon neutral housing, look at the incentives that might be available for home building, and look at the role of replacement fuel to heat homes. But the main area I'm interested in, I think the committee should be interested in, is in understanding exactly what this subject is about. If I can start, Richard, with you, do we have a clear idea of when the future home standard is actually going to be legally enforced?
Yes. So government at the moment are aiming to have that ready in December 2027, so 2 years away, and there will be a 12-month period of crossover.
So they're looking to implement this in 2027? That's not long.
Yes, that's correct. 2 years from now, yeah.
Is there anything else we need to know about the background that you would want us to consider today, Richard?
I think probably the most important thing to say, and just to help kind of provide context to what is a net zero home or a carbon neutral home, that's a home that's predominantly going to be powered by electricity through both the power and the heating. Other options are available, but generally speaking, you're looking at a property that's probably has got an EPC of C or better, and is going to be using electricity as its main heat source, so it might be through heat pumps or other means. And what that means is, as the national grid decarbonises, those homes reduce their carbon intensity, so they become closer and closer to net zero carbon. So I think that's probably the most important point to bear in mind.
So this is a big change, because what we're doing is taking future new homes off the gas grid altogether.
Yes, that's correct. So gas is being phased out because it's a carbon intensive form of heating. One of the challenges that we'll see is that at the moment gas is very affordable. Electricity is roughly 3 times the cost of gas to heat a property with. However, technologies like heat pumps, which are the prevailing technology at the moment, are typically 3 to 4 times more efficient. So we're seeing a general break-even point at the moment in the technologies between gas and heat pump technologies, assuming the property has a decent level of insulation. And this is really important. To be able to retrofit these technologies to existing properties, it's really important those properties have got decent levels of insulation so that we don't lose that heat and lose the energy.
I mean, I'm going to look at members to come in when they want. How aware is the industry of this coming down the road, and how prepared are they for it?
So we've been speaking to colleagues and to the colleges, importantly, and there is a lot of demand for this in the supply chain. At the moment, I mean, when we look at we had a study done across the old Marches area, so Shropshire, Herefordshire, Telford and Wrekin. It was a 2024 study, so fairly up to date, and it was called the Low Carbon Environment Goods and Services LSEGS study. And that study shows that at the moment, that sector of the market for Herefordshire is worth about 8.5% of Herefordshire's GDP. So it's really very significant. And when we specifically look at the colleges, there's been a lot of investment. So specifically, Marches LEP invested £1.2 million in Herefordshire Low Carbon Technology Centre in recent years. And we're very lucky to also have NMITE as well as the other colleges. But the colleges are telling us that they don't have enough courses to meet demand. So clearly there's the motivation to get there, But at the moment, we don't have the supplier base and we don't have the ability to train as many as we need. And so when we look at the LSEG study and we look at 2030 and then beyond to 2050, what we're seeing is an anticipated skills gap.
If nobody wants to come in, I'll continue. The government is setting down this future home standard, which came from the previous government, I think. What are they doing to facilitate the industry to actually deliver this in the timescales that they're given? Do we know, Richard?
Specifically in terms of government support?
Yes.
I'm not familiar, but I'll look to other colleagues to answer that.
I mean, have they given us this future home standard target without any support at all as to how it might be implemented?
So that's not something that we have at the moment. So we're not. That's not something I'm familiar with, I should say. So I don't know if there is support beyond our specific remit. So maybe colleagues in economy might be aware of that, whether there's support in that area, whether there's support for upskills and upskilling and supporting the educational sectors, perhaps. So I couldn't say for sure either way.
Because one of the major constraints here will be the skills available to deliver these new homes, because it is a different skill set in many ways. And if there's no government funding that's apparent, then the burden's going to fall on the council, isn't it? Councillor Swingle?
Yes, to an extent. I mean, and we have sponsored places for like Home Lacey at the low carbon building. So we've tried to sort of directly support that, but I don't think we have the capacity or the resource to do everything that needs to be done in this space. We would really look to government to help, because it's not just Herefordshire, but the entire nation has to make this change, and we have to upskill, make sure that we're prepared and we're able to do that. So we'll do what we can do, but we have limited resources.
As you know, I have raised skills as an issue for us within the council. There was the idea of having a skills champion, and he said the skills champion is the cabinet member, I think. Is it for economy? Yes. Whether that's enough in terms of going forward, I'm not sure. Whether we should have somebody, even as cabinet support, dedicated to taking that area forward. Because it seems to me, and I'll bring Councillor Thomas in a minute, that it's all very well having a standard, Richard. It's all very well having it imposed by government. It's all very well having a timetable imposed by government. But the reality is somebody somewhere has to make this happen. And that's the worry I've got. And I think the skills side should have been getting developed way before this standard was being brought in.
Well, there is this old saying about that regulation leads to innovation. In other words, if there's a regulatory standard out there, then the market will have to respond. So a certain amount of this work will fall to the market to make sure that they have the skills that they need. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to deliver the housing that they want to deliver. But there will, but there's a role for the council in trying to encourage and support that where we can. And I think we're kind of, we're in an interesting place with, I think quite a innovative and forward-thinking education sector, and particularly with Enmite and the timber work there. That in a sense we're kind of potentially able to take on board very innovative and looking forward in this area, but it's always going to need capacity. We can't do everything, and actually we shouldn't try to do everything because we wouldn't be able to. But it's about supporting, triggering that change in others and the marketplace.
I'm going to bring in three councillors now who want to ask questions, but I'll just leave us with this thought at the moment, and we'll come back to it. It is the council that has to deliver 27,260 houses within the next local plan. And how we facilitate that is going to be very important. But before you come back on that one, because that's something I do want to cover later on, Councillor Thomas.
Just going back to that point about training, all building trades are sponsored by CITB, which is the government's training board. I know a lot about the CITB. There is very, very little. Now, if you talk to the college, they'll say the fault lies with the CITB. They won't stump up the money. They won't add courses. I was in the building industry and I trained a lot of apprentices. And most of those were sponsored by the CITB, so therefore the college would take them on. But now the college is sort of decreasing the number of apprenticeships in the building industry. And as far as I'm aware, CITB are not sponsoring any of these what we might call modern trades now for, which is basically electricians and plumbers, because those are the ones, but there's a lot of skill to fit heat pumps, ground or air, and there just isn't the staff about. And one of the problems is that most of the companies, just in Hereford, they probably employ 4 or 5 people. The profit margin in it isn't actually very great. It's the manufacturers that are still making the money, say for air source heat pumps. You know, they charge what, £5,000–6,000 for a pump. It actually costs them less than £1,000 to make. So small companies are not going to train apprentices because they're under pressure all the time, and the last thing you want is to have, you know, a lad tugging along the back behind who isn't being able to be trained properly. So it's a major problem, and as council said, the council can't do it. Yeah, when I left school, a lot of my colleagues went to Hereford Tech College, and the Tech College in those days I think was funded by the council. But those days have gone. So, and we've also got this constant moving of the goalposts. Everybody knows, example with electric cars, we cannot produce the electric. We cannot supply the charge points. We haven't got the infrastructure to carry the power from where it's been manufactured to Hereford. So the whole thing, unfortunately, is slowly dropping into a bog, I think. And I think we do need some very clear government thing, but they're obviously very short of money, so they keep telling us, so we're not probably going to get any out of those. So I don't quite know where we're going, and I am concerned about it.
Wants to come in on that point.
It's only because it's a question of understanding. So rather than before the conversation develops too far. So when we talk about the 27,000 houses that need to be carbon neutral, these are new houses.
Yes.
So and most of them are going to be delivered by large development companies. So how much responsibility do we need to take for providing that workforce? Surely they are a national operation that draw on people from all over. And also, sorry, I did want to say, I think we're doing a lot in terms of developing our skills force, from what I can see. So, and working with the colleges. So, you know, maybe we're doing as much as we can, and it's over to the developers to now provide the workforce if they're going to deliver those houses.
I think that's probably broadly true. But if there's something else that we can do, then, you know, we're always open to what that might be. But yes, I was the things that it's not the local authority that delivers the housing. What we have to do is deliver the plan, and the plan has to have credible, deliverable sites. But Councillor Pemberton is quite right. But the majority of those sites will put, or the heavy lifting, as it will be done by the volume house builders who do have the skills and the resources. And what we need to make sure is our policies are aligning with the Future Home Standard, and that we're putting policies that will deliver the best possible quality of housing in terms of carbon, without unduly reducing the deliverability of the site.
Can I just follow on with that? Just to say, is there any indication that these large developers who usually build the houses in Herefordshire don't have the workforce or the skills to deliver these houses, carbon neutral?
Well, I can't speak for all of them. I suspect it'll be a mixed picture. But I do know that I've been on. I've spoken to some of the volume house builders and have been impressed with actually not only that they do have the ability to deliver these sites, but actually that they are without having to. They are wanting to deliver homes that are exceeding the building control standards for insulation and for renewable energy delivery. I think that's very encouraging that they are, as it were, readying themselves and that they're wanting to do that. I suspect probably because that reflects a desire in the market. That people want to buy houses that are going to be affordable to run and well insulated.
Siobhan, I was going to bring Siobhan in because she indicated, and I'll bring you in, Richard, and then I'll bring in Council.
Thanks, Councillor Stark. I just wanted to come in on, but just going back to the skills and are we set up for the skills and what we're going to need to bring the housing forward. Obviously, we're at the very early stages of developing a local plan. So all the policies around, what we're talking about here, we will start to develop them. But just touching on that, we're already having discussions about this very topic, what skills do we need as we think about the local plan. And there's wider matters to think about is the accommodation of staff who come in to help with developments. And we already know that our hotels in Hereford, they're oversubscribed with people who want to stay here. Starting Gate, Premier Inn in town costs really, really expensive to stay there and impossible to get accommodation. So that's one of the things we're looking at as part of the local plan is to think about how we accommodate people. The colleges obviously have got courses to a degree, but we have an early in its infancy really with the development of courses. So that's another area. So we are tiptoeing into this and aware of the problem. And the Skills Board in the council, the Economy and Place Board, does have the leader of the college, Herefordshire and Ludlow College there, the head of the school, involved in those discussions. So they are aware and have been for some time and know about this high target. So I just wanted to give some reassurance that it's been thought about more broadly and not just about housing and sites and that.
Yeah, before I bring Richard in, I've still got an issue around skills here. I know we're talking about that the industry may or may not be ready, that we may not be ready, but this is a new standard. When new standards are implemented, we all know the challenges that we can face with new standards. So I think I'll part that one, but I do think there is an area there that we might want to make a recommendation on. Richard?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Stark. Just to add to that, really, and respect that you probably will want to make a recommendation around that. Just speaking to economic development colleagues, the council has done quite a lot in the area. So, as mentioned, we've got the Skills Board that the council helps facilitate. At Plough Lane had the first skills conference, which had over 100 businesses coming together. And the council's allocated nearly £2 million of its UK SBF to supporting local training providers. So I think the point being made that the council's probably done as much as it can is probably a really fair point. The council has done quite a lot in that area.
But whether it's done enough in the future home standard, because that's a general approach to skills. This is the point I'm trying to make. We're talking here about a particular standard and the impact that will have on a particular industry. And that's the thing I'm trying to get at. I don't disagree with everything you're saying about the amount of activity that's going on about trying to grow the skill set across the whole economy in Herefordshire. But this is a particular issue that we're focusing on today. You've been very patient, Councillor Mason.
You're very kind, and unfortunately, while being patient, I've just had more and more ideas coming to my head, so I'll try and keep this as a sort of properly formed observation. My first thought was about skills. it strikes me that there are two different sides to the skills argument. The first bit is whether we have the skills available to us in the market to build the houses to the standard we want. And the second thing is whether there's an economic benefit for us building those skills in-house. Because I'm struck by the story I was told before, and my first question will be, how commonplace is this? That we know that some of our timber-framed companies are actually now busy building houses elsewhere in the country. And so are we in a misunderstanding when we think that if we build the skills locally, those skills will actually be deployed locally to build the houses that we need? Or is it the case that we have two different arguments going on? Even if we do build the skills, will they go and work for, Border Oak, whoever it might be, and go and build beautiful houses down in Essex or Hampshire where the market conditions support it, and we suddenly realise we haven't solved that problem, even though we found an economic solution? Flip side of that, is this actually something where we have to acknowledge that there are market leaders elsewhere and we're confusing how we source those skills? I think what I've heard is that there's a deficit across the whole country in these skills, and so there is an opportunity for us. But that's my first part of my question. It comes back to the skills point. Have we conflated the two aspects of it?
So I think, yes, that's a fair point about, if everyone upskills in Herefordshire, there's no guarantee that they're not going to use those skills in Kent. And certainly we do have some of the SME builders that are R&D building in Kent and other places, because the part of Herefordshire where they normally build is stuck with nutrient neutrality, and it's very difficult to deliver housing. So yeah, I don't know. You wouldn't be able to really contain that. Really, I think for myself, I think that this kind of skills gap work needs to be dealt with nationally. The government needs to come up with a strategy to deal with it. And I think, Chair, as you pointed out, this is a specific area. This isn't just a sort of a general wash of everyone needs to upskill, but there are a lot of quite big questions coming down the line around employment, employability, and what does and doesn't constitute a job in the face of AI and the changes that are likely to happen, to the jobs market. So actually, this is a very large piece of work. But the readiness to meet the future home standard, yes, I think that it has to be dealt with nationally. But we're not in control of that. We can only look at our own supply chain, and particularly, I think the volume house builders are one case, but the SME house builders are a different case. Although we have got some incredibly innovative work going on in particularly the timber frame building area, which is where they do appear to not only have the required skills, but are nationally leading.
And we haven't mentioned housing associations yet. Right, Councillor Mason.
Thank you. So you talk about nutrient neutrality, and of course that was going to come up fairly quickly. It strikes me again that I worry about market failure. I worry about the fact that we've got all these objectives, but actually, is it viable? And so we've got the economic viability for the developers. We've got the viability of the grid that has been mentioned. And I know all this we're going to come on to this a bit later, but I think it ties into this idea that if we just try and let the market, I'm traditionally a bit of a free marketeer, but if we try and let the market do its thing when others are intervening, are we going to be left behind? Particularly if we have our hands tied behind our back with the nutrient neutrality thing. So my question is, if as a council we should be spotting an opportunity to build some local advantage here over other areas who are developing skills, over other areas that are essentially pitching to developers to develop the houses that are instructed on them by government? Or is it something, and I fear what I've heard from Councillor Swinglehurst, is that we sort of need the government to bail us out of this because the costs are too great for us to be able to try and buck the market until somebody supports us. So I'm a bit stuck because I'm trying to get my head round how we solve the fact that we don't seem to have the resources locally. We've got our hands tied behind our back to some extent. We are hindered against other people in the notional free market. So is it something that we need to intervene in with a sort of a top-down plan, rather than hoping that a little intervention here and a little intervention there and an unblocking here and an unblocking there will actually get us over the line? It's an open question, but I'm really struggling with the whole viability aspect of this.
Just before I invite anyone to come in, if you remember when we had the point raised earlier on by me, what is the government doing about this? We didn't get an answer that
Exactly.
said the government is doing this, this and this, which suggests to me that we're on a order here. Again, this is another example
Indeed.
of a standard being imposed nationally, but where local councils have been left to try and pick up the pieces when we have to do so much else. I mean, we become almost, dare I say, a dumping ground for national government policies. But that doesn't stop us still thinking about, right, if that's a challenge we've got, what can we do about that as a local council to facilitate at least trying to meet this standard within Herefordshire? That's the point I'm trying to make, Councillor Mason.
I
And
agree
think
with you.
we're still stuck with that today. We're not going to get an answer from government today. Councillor Thomas? Yeah.
Just going back, talking about skills, etc., and large developers. I think probably most of you are unaware of how a large developer works. The large developer will decide on a site, get permission to anything. He will employ a manager, sometimes an under manager, definitely what's called a banksman, and he'll employ a sales staff. And most of those are actually on piece rate. The rest of the people that work they don't work for the developer. They are all self-employed companies, and I know a lot of them. And they put in 6 bricklayers, 10 bricklayers, whatever. They go, they move around the site. So they don't actually really employ anybody. There is no pressure really on the developers. They're only interested in one thing, like most people in business anyway, is making a profit. And that is how they make a profit, is by cutting everything to the absolute minimum. And as you say, to have a carbon zero house, you need an awful lot more skill, which is an electrician and plumbers. And I'm sure a lot of you have tried to get a plumber to come and probably even just service your heating. And they are virtually non-existent. They are so busy, they will just... So it is skills, and I do agree with the young lady over there. But I was asked to go to the college and I spoke to a young lady there, not necessarily that young, but she was totally unaware of the situation with the college and how few people they build. For example, I know when I had tried to get plumbers through apprenticeship, I had to send one to Five Ways in Colford and one to Worcester. Hereford weren't going to do a plumbing course. I don't know whether they do now or not, I don't know. But it is skills. We need the money to flow from government down to the colleges. And when you get the money to the colleges, the courses, hopefully you might get the local builders to send young lads to the college. But it is a but. And I was on the the employers board at the college. So again, I've got first-hand knowledge of all. And there just isn't the amount of employers prepared to take apprentices on. So you are really up against it, unfortunately.
Well, at the moment, I'm going to bring in a minute, Councillor Stone. We have 2 areas that I think we're going to make recommendations on. I think one is the readiness of the industry for this. I'm not hearing with precise assurance that the industry is ready for it. Because as you say, Councillor Thomas, and we all know this, anyone who's ever bought a house and something goes wrong, the builder then says, oh, that was a subcontractor. That was a subcontractor that did the shower cubicle that collapsed in a house that I bought once. So we had to chase up the subcontractor. The house builder refused to take any responsibility for it. So it does happen that you have all these various partners involved in house building. And as you say, Councillor Thomas, electricians are in short supply. And if, as you say, Richard, this is all about delivering electric powered houses, then where are all the electricians going to come from unless we're accepting that we won't necessarily need any more electricians to build the houses that are subject to the future home standard. So there's a number of issues around skills and around preparation of the industry, and I think we just need to capture that. And to be honest, we can't look to the government for this. I haven't seen anything from what you've said in terms of report and everything else, that the government is providing any initiative here. And it might be something that we might even have to include as a recommendation for the executive, perhaps to go and find out. So that could be another recommendation, John, that the executive should go and find out exactly what support the government or the appropriate ministry is going to provide here to help us. Councillor Stone.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think we've got a real problem here. The government, and all governments to be fair, are very good at passing the parcel and expecting councils to do everything. They did the same with public health. First of all, the council was given money from the government. Then all of a sudden they said, no, there's no more money. You've got to do it all yourselves. They're very good at that. We can't just rely on market forces, I'm afraid, for all the reasons we've just been given. The government has got to step in if they want us to develop carbon neutral housing everywhere. And of course, it's not just here. The government's target is 1.5 million homes, isn't it, over the next few years? Huge number. So the pressure on skills is going to be absolutely immense. And we just don't have the skilled people. This brings us back to apprenticeships. Only this morning, we just heard on the news, higher unemployment again. Well, it's all going in the wrong direction, Mr. Chairman. That's what's worrying me. I'm all in favour of carbon neutral housing and us doing the best we can, but there's only so much that the councils can do. As I say, the government needs to step in. One final point on accommodation. There's been mention of hotels and where you put up all the plumbers and the electricians and all the people that are going to have to move in and build these houses over the next few years. Could I also mention there's quite a bit of accommodation in local pubs. Certainly in my area, there are lots of pubs who are struggling at the moment, who would really helpful for them if they could put up some of these people. And it would help keep some of our local pubs in the rural areas going as well. So that's just the thought I'll leave you with, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Stone. It doesn't make our job any easier, but thanks very much for that insight. Going back to Councillor Mason's point about producing our own skills and then losing them to the rest of the country, I think your point about accommodation, about having to rely on those skills being imported in, seems to me to make it even more imperative that we do try and build a skill set within the county, however the risk that might be, Councillor Mason, of them drifting away.
I don't have a problem with them drifting away. I just think we need to be aware of the risk.
Councillor Peverdine wants to come in now.
Yeah, so touching on both those points, the first one was about how I think the skills shortage is going to impact our local house builders more possibly than the large developers who have got access to a much wider pool. And so if we were going to take any kind of practical measures on council level, recognising that much of this support needs to come from government, then we need to kind of support our small businesses to keep a pace with kind of larger developers. And then my other question was about accommodation. I lived in Austria for 11 years, worked for a ski school, and it was standard that all those businesses, you know, when suddenly there were 1 million more employees because it was winter season, you know, for the tourist industry and skiing and stuff like that. The businesses provided accommodation, sometimes in really high quality kind of container buildings. I just wondered if there's a precedent or whether there's a case for actually asking developers to think about how they accommodate the workers that they need to build their houses, which, you know, generate their profit. They obviously have a big land and they have all this kind of building capacity. Can they not sort of provide accommodation for their workers as a kind of first phase before they build houses? Does that happen ever?
I'm not aware that it does. I've not seen it happen here in the county, but as we go forward, we can start to explore and present that to developers, you know, because they're bound to be struggling with this issue as well in the skills shortage. So it's all about trying to find solutions, really, isn't it?
I said I would come back to the housing target of 27,260, as if we don't have enough problems in trying to get the absolute numbers built. We now have a future home standard coming fast down the line that creates even more complexity in terms of what sort of houses we want built in terms of the 27,260. And I'm going to add another layer of complexity here. What about affordable and social housing? As far as I'm aware, and the greenhouse that I saw up at St Mary's Village in Ross was a wonderful house designed to be carbon neutral, but it was 355,000 and it was tiny. So what does this mean for housing associations and for any possibility of the council trying to increase the amount of social housing within the county? Because I assume any future social housing will have to conform with the future home standard as well. So how are we going to square that circle? Has anyone thought about that?
The social housing, you're right, it would have to be policy compliant, just like the other housing. They wouldn't need to be a distinction. They would need to meet the same standards, but it will come back to viability, and that's when the local plan will be looking at its viability testing and what we can achieve. But it's all dependent. I mean, if this becomes statutory and we have to be building houses in this future ready homes standard, that they'll have to find a way to make it work. So that's, you know, we're limited really, and everything else we will, you know, be choosing what the plan can deliver in viability terms to accompany development with everything else that's required to make it work. So.
But do we know what the housing associations think about it? Have we had any discussions with them at all?
Not at the moment, no. But our colleagues in strategic housing may be having these discussions. But again, we're at the start of this as to, you know, what their thinking is on things.
Because I'm looking at Councillor Thomas here before I bring you in. The cost of these houses must be higher than actually the cost of just building a bog standard house with a gas boiler. Is that right, Councillor Thomas?
A lot more expensive. So one of the problems is I was in the building industry for 30 years, and I only actually built one brand new house. That was for a friend. I think we spent something like about £750 on insulation, and I'm talking of that. I think it was probably about 200, but loving the inflation, about £750. I think I just built one double extension on a house recently, and I think the insulation was about that amount of money just for a small extension. If we're going to have carbon neutral, we have to have houses very, very well insulated. But that adds an enormous cost to the build. And there are many, many things that have gone on in the last 10 or 15 years that are increasing the cost of housing. Well, irrespective of the land, increasing the cost of housing, both the labour because they're short, so most men know their value. A carpenter today is earning £300-400 a day. When I started, he wasn't earning that a week. So you've got enormous pressure on your staff. You've got enormous pressure coming from the cost of building modern houses. And, you know, we're talking about not having building enough houses. Developers won't build houses they can't sell. At the moment, a lot of people, I'm looking at Richard there, you're reasonably young, to get a mortgage now is almost impossible. So the whole thing needs to be freed up. The trouble is with most governments, they put the cart before the horse. There's a solution, but they don't ever provide the way to that solution. So I think, you know, there's an awful lot we can do as regards the skills, but there's very, very little we can do with the supply of houses, because as much as the government stand on the perch and tell us we got to build 30-odd thousand houses, we haven't got the staff, we haven't got the facilities, and at the end of the day, developers won't build them because they can't sell them.
Councillor Swinhurst.
I think that it's not an even picture. So I mean, definitely, there's a development close to where I'm in St. Monard, so I drive past it most days coming up here, and the developer there made a choice to build homes to a very high environmental standard. And as far as I'm aware, that development's now completely sold. It also delivered its affordable housing percentage, so you know it's doable. Can be done. I think that's important to know. And the other thing is that sometimes the answer is in having a different approach to construction. So we have one of our local firms, Oak Rights, as developing, or they've developed an affordable house based on a pile system, pile screws, instead of having to do footings and all that. So it's built off-site, modular, very quick to construct. And that delivers affordability and is extremely low carbon. I think somewhere close to the passive house standard. So it's doable, but we possibly have to, you know, the industry has to respond to these demands, because I think, as Siobhan says, she's quite correct. You know, when it comes in, this is going to be the statutory requirement. There will be no, or I can't afford it, or it's difficult, or I don't know how to do it, because everyone's just going to have to figure it out. But it will probably require a variety of approaches and some innovation to get us where we need to be.
Just before I bring Councillor Pebbody in, and then Councillor Mason, I just want to make this observation for the committee. On the one side, under the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, I shouldn't use acronyms, we have an absolute standard of 27,206 houses that was imposed in the county with no buyer leave. Then on the other hand, somebody else in government is creating a different standard on the building control side, in a way, by saying, yes, we don't just want you to build 27,260 houses, we want to build 27,260 houses to a future home standard. And by the way, we know you're desperate for more social housing, we know you're desperate for more affordable housing, but no one has actually joined this all up. And I think one of the problems we've got as a committee is how our recommendations might reflect that, John. But Councillor Pebbody and then Councillor Mason.
I have a suspicion that the big housing developers are only going to build houses so that they can control their market and the profits. So they're probably just going to trickle down the houses that they want to. They're not going to flood the market with lots of houses, because that's going to damage their profits hugely. So I really do think they hold all the cards in terms of how we deliver these houses, which is why I think our focus should really be on what we can do to influence those developers. And then I had a question about affordable social housing, and the new plan, the local plan, you know, talks about how our new buildings are designed to maintain local distinctiveness in regards to kind of height and scale and things like that. But obviously the most efficient and the most affordable houses are actually kind of built up more, and whether we should be looking at our kind of design policy to make it easier to accommodate more affordable, more efficient houses, you know, more apartment blocks. Because I see affordable housing in new developments, and they're all lovely, but there's lots of bungalows, and that is not an efficient or cheap way of building, right? I mean, in my sort of non-builder's experience.
Yeah, so we are obliged to deliver some that lower level housing, bungalows, because of accessibility. That's become a pressing need in that sector of housing. So there is a requirement for that in the National Planning Policy Framework. But we can look at densities as well to deliver houses that are of different sizes and various different makeups, and that will give you the varied densities across a site. You know, we talk about density averages, you know, 35 dwellings to 40 dwellings per hectare possibly, but that would be a mixture of different types and tenures and sizes. So there needs to be some thinking about, you know, what that's all made up of. But certainly, you know, room for creativity on that side, and based on the needs of the area, which we would have in a form of evidence to support the plan.
And can I just check that if a accommodation needs to be accessible accommodation, does it have to be on the ground floor? Are not apartments accessible?
Yeah, they are, and the lifts, that's the problem, would be expensive. So we'd have to explore there in terms of, you know, going forward with our new study, you know, just that very point. Can we make more efficient use of land? Because that is a requirement of the NPPF. But yeah, at the moment, it's primarily bungalows that we deliver.
Can I bring in Councillor Mason, please?
Thank you. So I'm confused again, and I feel that every time we're in this conversation, we sort of get so many conflicting or challenging components. The first thing that's confusing me is right at the beginning we talked about how heat pumps at the moment are effectively something like 4 times the efficiency of electricity. Gas is about 4 times less expensive than electricity. So essentially what that's saying is that if that's the only thing that's been done, we're going to be moving from a gas exercise or a gas form of heat to an electricity form of heat, and that would be notionally cost neutral. Is that roughly what we're at?
The huge caveat is the installation costs. So installing a heat pump is much more expensive than a gas boiler.
Exactly.
So that's the difference.
So the running costs are neutral, and there is a further upfront cost. So actually, forgive me for labouring the point, what that means is that for those people that are looking to buy these carbon neutral houses, although there might be at some point down the line a cost saving, although I've not seen that manifested in their day-to-day operations, there will be an increased cost in the production of that house, which sits on top of that mortgage or high level of equity. One of the problems we've already got in the county is people not being able to afford on local wages the mortgages they need, but we've got lots of people coming in with retirement funds or, you know, larger mortgages from elsewhere, supported from elsewhere. My instinct is that this is actually exacerbating that problem. And if that is the case, can we get some sort of measure as to how much of a problem that is? Because I sometimes hear us say, oh, well, of course, it will be very attractive to people to buy the house that is carbon neutral, but it's only attractive to people who can afford that, not in a cash flow term, but in a, actually, I've got enough equity, I could buy it, and now I've got very low outgoings. That's a specific part of our demographic. And although, as I say, we're not central planners, that worries me a lot.
It's whether we can do anything about market prices, though. This is the thing.
Well, I'm wondering if anybody is doing anything like this to recognise that problem, and forgive me for finding a financier's view on it, but is it possible to find some sort of mortgage top-up fund that effectively offloads that savings into something that would be specific in Herefordshire? Is this done anywhere where you have a financier who says, I will essentially subsidise the purchase of the house in recognition of the fact that this is a house that is environmentally sound, and you will therefore be able to pay for that subsidy at a later point as this sort of mortgage top-up on the back of the savings that you expect to get from the increased carbon neutrality of the house? I ask if there's anybody doing that, because it's the sort of thing that financiers would get very excited by.
I'm not sure we would have an answer.
I think that no one here is aware of anything like that, but it's a really interesting suggestion.
is.
So I think we might chew that one through and see where we go with it. Thank you.
I'm just going to ask John something. Would that be a relevant recommendation for this committee? Because it isn't really something the council can deliver, is it?
Yeah, that was my thinking when the discussion was unfolding, is that this isn't something that the council has very much control over. Certainly there are discussions that could be had, but in terms of formulating a recommendation, I'm not sure where that would go in terms of it's not a responsibility of the executive, for example.
It'd be interesting, Councillor Mason, if you could take this up.
I
with
would be
someone.
delighted to draft a question, because I think there are plenty of places where we could encourage third parties or indeed partners of the council to intervene. So I'm more than happy to come up with a set of questions to work through with our experts.
And when would you want to do that?
I'm not quite sure. When would the chair want it?
Well, I'm going to try and finish this debate with recommendations round about 11:30. So if you want to draft some questions. There are more questions than recommendations, are there?
I can make a recommendation.
If you can make it recommendations. And then the committee, along with John, can consider whether the council can do anything about it. Okay. Thank you.
So lots of recognition of the cost and of making neutral carbon housing. How often do developers create centralised heating systems for all their houses? You see all these new houses, and every single one has an air source heat pump on the side of it, which is expensive and ugly. And there must be scope for us to kind of push on sort of centralised heating systems. Is there?
I'm looking to planning colleagues, so it's something that is done across the UK. It's not nearly as common as Europe on the continent, where essentially what we're talking about is heat networks here. So you'd have a centralised heating system, as you were saying, and then you would distribute that heat typically through hot water and insulated pipes throughout a new development's an excellent time to do it. It's something that we've looked at in Herefordshire. We've done studies across the marches, across the county for kind of viability, particularly around cost. So 10 or so years ago, so options were including gas at the time as well as heat pumps. Cost viability was always a struggle. We did support the hospital with doing a heat network on their site, so we did get something off the ground. But as far as I'm aware, it's not terribly common. I'm not aware of any domestic ones, unless they're micro. You do get micro heat networks, particularly of off-grid properties, sort of 2 to 3 properties. Anything above 2 properties connected is technically a heat network. Obviously, anything below like 10 properties is kind of considered a micro network. But they're not very common. It's quite a good idea, but we have looked at it, and the economics can be difficult.
Is the barrier to that the fact that it needs sort of ongoing management? Because developers tend to kind of sell their houses and then leave them to it, sort of thing. But of course, a centralised a heating network would need staff and management going forward, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. I don't know if my colleagues in planning are aware of any that we've got in the county for domestic.
I'm not aware of any. There was a study on the Ross District Heat Network, but from just some early soundings that the cost of doing something like that would be really difficult with the site and what we're trying to deliver on top of it. So it is it's another viability issue here with delivering something of that scale, because as Richard said, the maintenance and everything that comes with it is challenging. So,
and it's not something. I mean, if that were to happen, would it be something you would ask the developer to deliver? I mean, it wouldn't be something that the council would have to deliver.
yes, I would imagine it would have to be as part of the development to make it work, and it depends on the scale. It's an area that we could explore further, because at the time we were looking at much less housing on this particular site, so possibly with larger amounts of housing, it may be cost effective and pay for itself, but that's something that we would need to really get into. But it's on our radar. Those sort of energy efficiency measures are there, and we are looking at them as bringing the local plan and making it zero carbon as much as we can.
Before I bring in Councillor Thomas and Councillor Foxton, I'm going to close this debate in 20 minutes, as I said, 11:30. Then we will have to consider our recommendations. Then we will have a short break before moving on to our other agenda items. But I'll bring in Councillor Thomas now.
It's a great idea. It works where you have a mass heat, like a very large factory. Nuclear plant. There's one in Suffolk. There's a housing, although most of that has been pumped into greenhouses, but apparently there are about 70 houses. Practically, it doesn't work. You can't do it with heat pumps because your water temperature never gets above about 48 degrees. For this, you probably need steam. If you don't have steam, you have to have very high temperature water because of the temperature drop as it goes through the pipes is enormous. So you're losing a huge amount of energy on the way. So from a practical point of view, it isn't. Just going back to high-rise buildings, most of Herefordshire isn't suitable for high-rise buildings because, for example, Hereford is mainly built on a gravel bed. And you'd have to put piles down a long way to go up 5 or 6 stories. So Leominster's the same. Ross is sandstone. That again is you wouldn't be able to find solid rock to build it on. So it would be very great because that is obviously a cheaper way of housing people, but it's not a practical thing.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of these houses, they're obviously much more expensive. Also, the maintenance of them will be a higher spec and therefore, again, more costly. Regarding things like, for example, solar panels, could certain things be packaged and therefore for example, things like solar panels, obviously it's ideal to put them on when a house is being built. It makes sense. But can it be broken into chunks where people are offered certain things to make it possible to sell houses? Just a thought.
Does anyone want to pick that one up?
Well, I think what we don't know quite is what's going to come forward in the Future Homes plan from the government. So we have to align with that and respond to that. And it's very likely that will simply say these are the requirements. And the idea of sort of phasing it or packaging it or doing it in any different way. These are the requirements. If we're building a new house, this is what our expectations are in terms of insulation and renewable energy and electrification. And as a council, we will be obviously we will have to align our policies to whatever that is. The retrofitting of existing housing is a slightly different picture again. So so as you say, it's the best time to do it is when you've got a new house. But an enormous number of our houses are quite old housing stock, quite thermally inefficient, and so we do put quite a lot of effort into retrofitting, but again, that's constrained by our capacity and resource.
Councillor Owens.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so related to that, I guess, obviously the standard was meant to be in place now. It's very delayed. We think, 27, possibly 28 even. So in the interim, houses are going to be built to the sort of the interim standard from 21. Do we know, I appreciate this might be an unknown, but do we know if there will be a requirement for those houses to be retrofitted? Because there's sort of issue there with retrofitting of houses that are currently built to the current standard, which might need to be improved. If so, is that something that we can help or do something about? I guess so. What's our potential role in that?
Yeah. So we don't know for sure is the honest answer. It's highly unlikely that any government would mandate retrofit for properties in the future, only ever kind of help facilitate and support that. So that's something that we do at the moment through our Warm Homes local grant scheme. And we have done for probably 10 years or so through various kind of Warm Homes grant schemes. So we've done about 300 properties in the county to date. Typically, most of that support has been focused on those who live in fuel poverty, so those who struggle the most with their bills. That's where we focused, and on obviously poor energy performing homes, with the target of getting them up to or as close to as possible to an EPCC. So yeah, it's very hard to tell what future will bring in terms of the requirement, but it's very unlikely they'd ever mandate retrofit. And I think just to kind of add to the points earlier, the points around can we design new buildings more cleverly in a way to make them more efficient without necessarily massively increasing the costs, kind of putting that aside, what we do know is if you do have to or need to retrofit a property, it will certainly be more expensive. And the good point around, well, actually, can we give people options now so that we're not retrofitting, but new buildings are coming to standard? Because I think probably the worst thing we can do is build new buildings now that need retrofitting to meet net zero standards in the future.
This leads me on to another area that I want to cover today, which is around the planning service and the building control service and how prepared it is for all of this, Siobhan. I mean, that's one of the issues that I'm wondering, because it's going to lead to new challenges for you, isn't it?
It will, and probably more quickly with our development management colleagues. The local plan can obviously prepare and consider this as part of moving forward. Future Homes, if it does, appear in 27, we will be working towards it. But the more immediate effect will be when the planning applications start coming in after that Future Home standards become statutory. So we can plan to some extent and prepare. I can't speak on behalf of building control, but obviously they're dealing with their own challenges at the moment and what they are having to contend with, and it may be useful to have a conversation with them to see what their thoughts are.
I mean, I'm going to come up with a recommendation around how prepared the planning service and the building control service is for this. But it does touch upon a number of points that Councillor Owens, Councillor Foxton and others have made about whether we're aware of all the implications of all of this, and where it is of direct relevance to the council, such as when we're dealing with planning applications, when we're looking out and applying building control standards, whether we really are on the top of this or not. I wouldn't criticise anyone for it, because it's a government imposed standard and they haven't really given us much of a context in which to work. But I do think there's a recommendation around that which could pick up a lot of these points about what is the implication of this for planning and for building control. And what about if someone does come out with a property that hasn't quite met the standards, how do you go about helping them to meet the standards? Because that's going to be one of the big issues as well. And while I accept what you say, Richard, about we don't know whether retrofitting will be a mandatory requirement for those houses that may not be built to future home standards yet, we may want, and the residents may want, or the homeowners may want, to try and get there anyway. So again, we've got to think about what the demand might be on us as a planning service, as a building control service, of what homeowners might desire if they feel they haven't quite got the house they wanted, but they do want to comply because they are environmentally aware. So there's all these issues, and I think that's one of the big areas that the council will have to address, and it will be one of our recommendations. I'll let you have one question, then I want to move on to incentives and alternative fuels, because I get.
I just wondered whether some of the sort of planning documents, the kind of supplementary planning documents that go with the planning applications, whether they have proved to be a support to people to kind of make the right choices when they're putting in their application. So I know there's a climate change measures checklist. Is that routinely completed? Does it show you that people are preparing, or does it guide people to put those points into their planning application where it may not have done previously? And is it a tool that we should be using for this as well?
Yeah, I understand that the climate change checklist is still used by development management, and so people submitting their applications can go through that checklist, although, as I understand, it's not mandatory to do that. But yes, I mean, it would be really helpful if, to get on board with the Future Home Standard, there were things implemented like further validation checks as applications come in, and officer training as well to make sure that they can guide prospective developers as to what is required when they submit their applications. So that kind of information then is there and open to people to understand what's required.
And that kind of checklist, I mean, I know it's a big old procedure anyway when you're putting in a planning application. Do you, generally when people are making planning applications, are those kind of supplementary additional checklists, are they considered to be prohibitive, or are they kind of supportive? I mean, are they a good idea?
I can't talk for development management myself because I'm a planning policy officer. However, as I understand it, they're really useful to guide people to know what kind of things we're looking for and have they made all the right proposals in their applications to meet those elements. So for them, it's really helpful to understand that, especially the smaller developers rather than the large-scale developers. So I think that is helpful. And just to add, we do have regular agent forums with development industry, and they tend to be the smaller agents working in the locality. So things like this we can ask to have on the agenda and to see, and maybe invite colleagues to come in and present to the agents as well to talk about it as a topic, because it's a regular ongoing, and it's a good sort of relationship we've got with them as a regular, and presenting issues and challenges, and we do get challenged, but equally it could be a platform to share information and pre-warn people of this coming down the line.
We've got 10 minutes left. Quickly, Councillor Mason, if you can.
Good question. Yes, if you're using it yourself. If you were a part of a heat network and you were utilising that waste heat as the supply of heat, then you would be charging for it to help make the kind of economic case for the investment of the heat network to stack up. So if you were supplying heat into a heat network, you would be selling it.
Right, we've got 10 minutes left. The next objective, I think, falls because it was talking about incentives for energy efficient home building, but quite frankly, the standard is going to be the standard, and we're going to have to comply with it. So I really think while we thought that might have been a good objective at the time, I'm going to take the chair's prerogative and cancel it. That leaves us with one final area I want to discuss before we go on to our recommendations, and that is alternative fuel replacement. I mean, I think is that not more, Richard, to do with retrofitting rather than future homes? And I wonder whether that is particularly relevant to us. I know you did usefully cover it in the report, but is there anything of relevance for this particular debate today? I'm just wondering.
Not really. You're right in saying it's not super relevant for new build. Typically, new build is going to be fully electrified, and I think this is something that we've briefly touched on today, but one of the big challenges will also be the electricity grid, because as we decarbonise, we're decarbonising transport through electrification, electric cars. we're decarbonising heat through electrification, through electric heating, heat pumps, etc., etc. So the stresses and strains on the grid are becoming greater. And so council colleagues, including the teams sat here today, do regularly work with the district network operator to help inform their plans into investing in the local grid in the future period.
I mean, that's an important point, because I think when we were looking at this objective, we thought that might take some of the pressure off the need for the grid to supply electric heated housing. If we did have a series of alternative options that were readily available, that were acceptable within the carbon neutral standard. But what you're saying is we're really looking at electric as being the only solution here. And that does mean what we're going to do about making sure there's enough generation there, capacity to actually deliver it.
That's right, because to meet the definition of a net zero home, we need to not have point source emissions from the property. And so most alternate fuels typically are going to have some sort of emissions associated with it from the property, which is why we're typically looking at full electrification of the property. There are things you can do to reduce the strain on the grid, so it's not all down to the district network operator to reinforce the grid. So having more local generation and having more kind of micro networks and micro grids, obviously storage solutions in houses, whether it's batteries and solar or whether it's car charging and smart tariffs like that, you know, things are coming forwards to help support the local grids.
Then, Siobhan, there's a planning issue there, isn't there? There's a tension that I've noticed in terms of debates I've seen in the council about how far do you go to allocate land for local renewable electric supply as against that land being used for something else that might be more useful, plus the issues around whether residents are willing to put up with that. So where are we with this? Because it obviously is an issue that could very well become a big issue for us if, as you say, Richard, the generation capacity isn't there, the generation. No.
So with our call for sites, it's not just housing, it's lots of different types of land uses, and renewable energy being one of them. So so far, I'm not aware of any site proposals on that front. I would imagine that they may come in time, that some queries about it, but we haven't had anything so far, and it is obviously an option, and it's an opportunity for people to come forward with something, but these things sort of grow organically, that you know, something, you know, from an inquiry will lead to something else that we can look into. But as part of, you know, the plan and the zero carbon side of things, we will be looking at, you know, how are we addressing it across the plan. So you know, we will have to inquire further on this.
And that's the key point, committee members. A lot of these points we've raised are really relevant to the local plan and what emerges in the local plan. Now, I don't know whether we'll be able to list them all, John, but certainly a recommendation that the local plan must take account of all the implications that arise from the future home standard. And that does include maybe trying to facilitate the ability of those who want to provide renewable energy locally. Councillor Swingerhurst.
Yeah, just picking up that point about the provision of renewable energy locally. I mean, clearly there's a degree of tension between land uses, and so we have to, you know, for myself, I think it's important that you take a you know, holistic view of you know, here is land, what is the best use for it. Now, there might be things coming forward in the local nature recovery strategy, for instance, which show that actually a wildflower meadow or such and such would be the right use for a piece of land, and that will sit very comfortably alongside another use such as solar. But when I look about me here, the really important thing I always think about solar is that if you're generating electricity, it's really useful to generate it where you're also going to use it. and by and large, you're not using it, out in the countryside. You're using it in the cities and in the towns, where there are a lot of roof spaces. And just look here, we have an enormous number of roof spaces. So actually, I would like to see some really positive policies around that, and also on car parks. There's no reason that you can't put solar over car parks. It makes fantastically good sense in my head. It generates electricity proximal to where it is used, and it means that the land is not going to be covered with solar, because it can be used for other things as well.
Does you want to come in, Richard, or then?
It was just to kind of agree with the point Councillor Swinkhurst was making, really, that clearly land use strategy is a hugely important matter going forwards, whether it's land for food, land for housing, land for energy, etc., etc. So in this context, I was talking about rooftop solar on domestic dwellings would be an ideal solution.
And that would be enough, you think, to cover the future home standard?
With an efficiently, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the future home standard, we obviously need to wait to see the final documentation, but typically speaking, with a well-insulated property, with the technologies we've talked about today, a typical home with solar panels on it should be reasonably self-sufficient.
Right. Should that not be a requirement we lay down under building control, Siobhan? That's a leading question, I know, for you. You might not be able to answer it.
No, I think it would be best to seek advice from building control colleagues on that topic.
You can do, but that could be a specific recommendation, John, because it picks up on Councillor Foxton's point earlier about the package and having solar panels on board. Final point.
It was only just to flag up whether, the idea about generating electricity where it's needed, and it's needed in the cities, are we going to end up with a situation like we have with broadband, where you've got these really rural areas that have these kind of not spots, because there's, their demand has increased because they might have EVs and electric heating in their houses that have been retrofitted, but the grid isn't kind of evenly spaced. So I guess it's just kind of future-proofing for those rural areas that are already kind of deprived.
Well, one of the really great opportunities, I was chatting to a chap about this the other day, because it is extraordinary, which is actually, we're talking about a single dwelling with solar panels on the roof, and he has an EV. In fact, he had 2 EVs and a power bank. And he cycles the energy between the solar and the EV and the power bank, and never needs to buy electricity off the grid, ever. It's a single dwelling. And he has storage that's equivalent to 1/1000th of the largest national storage, which is Dogger Bank. That's one household. So actually, you don't need this to be done for you. You can do it if you have the resources. You can do this for a single dwelling in a very remote location. Create your own small grid.
Thank you, everyone. It's amazing how this topic crept up on the committee as carbon neutral housing, but when you start looking into it, the tentacles are huge. And this is something I'm glad we did discuss today, because as a council member, I wasn't really aware of this as being a major challenge for us, but after today I am. What I'm going to do now, because I think there are a number of recommendations we're going to have to crunch, I think we're going to have a 20-minute break, because John and I will look at recommendations. When you come back, we will agree recommendations, and then we will move on to the task and finish study on buses. But I'd like to thank everyone here, from Councillor Swinglewith along to Victoria Eaton, for your help today in scrutinising this topic. You're welcome to stay if you want, but I know you're all busy people, and you will see recommendations in due course. So can everybody be back for 10 to 12, please? And can we pause the live? Can you confirm? Right. For those still looking in, welcome back to Environment and Sustainability Scrutiny Committee of the 16th of December. In the interval, we've been looking at some recommendations that I now want to put to the committee for their approval. If we can get them on screen, John, that'll be great.
Just bear with me, Chairman. Yeah, it's not letting me.
Oh dear. We have 7 recommendations. 7 is a lucky number, by the way. I just want to remind the committee that.
There's quite a lot of recommendations, isn't it?
Not for this particular subject, isn't Councillor February? This subject is a minefield. Right. The first 3 you should be familiar with, because these are the 3 that I sent round as draft recommendations from the written evidence. Do you want to read them out? Yeah.
Okay, so the first recommendation is the executive should commission a piece of work in collaboration with house builders, including housing associations, to quantify the impact of implementation of the Future Home Standard on the availability of new housing targets for the county of 27,260. This should include the future availability of new affordable and social housing. The executive should initiate discussions with relevant industry partners to evaluate the skills required to deliver the Future Home Standard in the county and how this will feed into a joined-up approach by the council, including colleges, the Youth Employment Hub and those involved in career advice. Thirdly, the executive should implement a review of the council's policy and operational readiness and preparedness of planning and building control to ensure they are fit for purpose for when the Future Home Standard finally comes into force, including training requirements. There we go. So, recommendations continued. I am on mute. That short unintended break. The executive undertake a review audit of the governance support being put in place to assist the market to deliver the quantum of carbon neutral homes. In the development of the local plan, building control standards are reviewed to ensure they provide viable and affordable compliance with the development of carbon neutral homes. And the local plan, through building control policies, ensures that every new home built is fitted with solar panelling and or renewable heat sources to reduce the pressure on the national grid.
And then the final one.
And then the final one. So, Councillor Mason, this is a bit of an adaptation of your recommendation to try and give it some traction. The difficulty we had with it was that we weren't quite sure where that recommendation should go, but we've had a play around with the wording to suggest that the executive encourages government to investigate and consider options that allow a more balanced approach to the financial products available for home buyers to allow for downstream energy cost savings to provide a more attractive purchase viability for those who have income but lower equity.
What we could add to that is, we're talking here about energy efficiency homes, carbon neutral homes.
Yeah.
I think we could add that to it. If you want to add that to it, then I can then ask the committee for their comments.
While we're doing so,
Carbon neutral homes, yeah.
could we, you say you're pushing it to government, can we just say government and other stakeholders or something? Government is the longer arse, right? I know we like to push things to government, but
Stakeholders, yeah, like the
Yeah.
mortgage providers.
well, yeah, indeed, and anybody else that we decide might actually give us traction.
We'll add that. We'll add that, Councillor Mason. We'll just work on that. And then I'll come back to ask the committee for any comments they have. Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, can we go back to the second page? Because you're mentioning building control, whereas
Yeah, we'll go back, yeah.
well, planning is up to us to some degree. There are obviously some national standards now, but building control is purely nothing really to do with us, even though we employ the building control officers. Building control is nothing, is government. So they set the standards on building control. So I think we need to probably slightly reword that.
I just, this is just from my understanding, but when we were making recommendations on the retrofit warmer homes thing, it was suggested that there are different standards of building control, and you can choose higher. You can
Should be
choose
one.
to
There's only
aspire.
one. Yeah, this building control. There's only one standard divided between all the various categories, but they only have one standard, irrespective of whether it's Herefordshire Council or Worcester or whoever. There's one standard on building control, and
so
for privateers, there's also one standard they have to comply with. But
It's my understanding that we can adopt our own building standards locally, and it's also my understanding that through the local plan we could look and review our own building control standards.
well, we can change plan. We can on planning. We can, of course, because if we say every house has to have solar panels, which is something we should be sort of said a long time ago. We can do that through planning, but through building control, we have no control whatsoever. That is purely what the government edicts come down, and building control comply with them. Unfortunately, because in my years I ran across building control that quite frankly they can't cope with timber frame buildings.
Yeah, but the future home standard is a new requirement.
Yes.
So unless building control standards are also changed at the same time by government,
Yeah.
they'll be out of sync.
Yeah. Yeah.
So who's
Out
responsible?
of sync now. So. I'm just trying to get the wording right. That's all. Sorry, I'm
not saying you're not wrong, Councillor Thomas, but it's a very important point. That if you don't get the building control standards aligned with the future home standards, this is going to cause confusion.
Well, they will be. I would have thought so. When the government come out with this, they will. There'll be amendments to the building control. I would have thought so.
I mean,
the
word reviewed does allow Herefordshire Council planning services to go back to government and ask the questions that they don't know the answer to.
Yeah.
So I think that's still covered in the recommendation. It's for the planning experts to decide what they need to do in order to review them. Councillor Owens?
Thank you. What we're saying here is that the local plan control standards should try to align with what we anticipate to be the future standard that's going to come in eventually. Is that what we're aiming for here, that there should be like a best practice in the setting of these standards that will seek to align with, what we anticipate the future home standard to be, which is not currently the case, because we're sort of...
What do you think, John?
So it's my understanding that locally we can look at our own standards in terms of how we build homes in the county. So the point that the officers were making is that the local plan will facilitate the new housing and will provide the viability assurances that the housing can be delivered. In regard to the building standards, yes, the future home standards will be with us from 2027, but it is my understanding that we can also look at our own local policies to ensure that we can both comply with that and that they are viable for local house builders.
Can we add a bit then, just to pick up on Councillor Owen's point? After the they in the second line, to ensure they are aligned with the future home standard and provide. Because that gives you the get out clause, Councillor Thomas, about if they don't align with them, then what is the government doing about it? Because that brings the point home that we're getting this standard imposed here, we're getting the housing targets imposed here, but there's no joined up approach allowing us to actually implement it in a practical and, shall we say, smooth way. Does that answer your point in a way, Councillor Owens?
I think so. I mean, there's an urgent need for house building, so I don't want to stop houses being built.
Well, the future
by
home
setting impossibly
standard
high
could do,
standards,
but the future home standard could do that. That's the point. We're going to rely on the goodwill of house builders to comply, and if Councillor Thomas is right, and
Yeah.
the costs are going to go up.
Yeah, I'm being a bit flippant there. I think, yeah, I mean, this future standard is going to come in. It is designed to ensure, like, carbon neutrality. So I think aiming towards that, as some sort of benchmark at this stage is going to be a good idea. If that, yeah. Does that
If
make
it can
sense?
be implemented.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Can we go to the last recommendation, John? And just to make sure that Councillor Mason's happy with it. Yeah. Okay. Right, we have two things to vote on.
Can
do
I've
you
just
want
got a question about number 2, recommendation number 2.
go back to the one that I had on skills?
Yes. Have you just been talking about that?
No, that's the one I drafted in advance.
Right, yes. So it's just that it says should initiate discussions, and I think we heard that they are well into discussions with.
Continue.
Yeah,
Continue.
continue. I mean, they've certainly done a lot of work on talking to relevant industry partners.
Yeah, but they never gave us assurance that things were getting bottomed out. That was the problem.
Right.
So continue, okay. Right, we have two choices. One, we can vote for the recommendations individually or en bloc. Is the committee happy to vote for them en bloc? Can you show hands now? Thank you. Second, are the committee happy with the 7 recommendations as they now stand? Well done, everyone. And I think this is going to start a debate within the council that's overdue. And I think as a committee, we have added value today by raising the spotlight on an area that was creeping up on us without us realising the implications. Right, we will now go on to the task and finish study. The first thing we've got to do on the task and finish study on bus provision is to formally approve the terms of reference. They have been on the table a long time, committee members. There have been no further comments on them. So is the committee happy to formally approve the terms of reference for the task and finish study and bus provision? Can you vote now, please? Thank you. I think that's useful to have done that because it gives the task and finish study group a frame of reference now that they don't have to worry about. The second thing is we're going to get a progress report from Councillor Peverty. So over to you.
Can I just check whether it's this committee that has to approve me as chair of that group? That's never officially happened.
No, the group's meant to approve you as chair.
Yeah. Is that okay, everyone? I've done it for the last 2 meetings.
So is there a second there? Happy to.
Councillor Mason, do you have?
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. Right, so we've had 2 review meetings, each one preceded by a kind of lines of inquiry meeting. And Simon and I have also met separately with David Land a couple of times, and Gemma's joined a meeting. And we've had really good support from our officers through these meetings. So at the last meeting, we had Craig and Gemma and Natalie and David. I've also met twice with Philip Price, just to keep him on board with our progress and where we're kind of headed. And I will do that again before each of our review meetings. We are still, some of the information was not very forthcoming, but that's kind of highlighted one of the issues that officers have about collecting data, which actually has become a big focus of our review meetings as well. And we've been promised a huge amount of information at our next review meeting, which is in February. So there'll be a huge sort of information dump then, principally around subsidised routes, how the criteria for subsidising routes is decided, and that sort of thing. So the key findings from both the meetings that we've had sort of combined together is one, that our current powers are limited, but they are changing. So the council doesn't run or regulate buses. Our role is to convene the enhanced partnership, manage the infrastructure, and identify and fund socially necessary routes. And the bus services bill is expanding our local powers. So there are lots of options, including potential franchising options. We learnt that delivery is constrained by operator capacity. This is a real issue. 9 operators in Herefordshire, all facing driver shortages, limited technical capacity, and this really slows the delivery of improvements. Even though in the BSIP plan there are good aspirations that are funded, it's still quite hard to drive those through because we have to do that through the operators. The accountability within the enhanced partnership, which is the forum in which the council kind of interacts with those commercial operators, it is quite weak. We can influence because we provide subsidy to these companies, but there's a lot that we can't ask them to do, particularly if they're running commercialised routes. So we have very little information that gives us the full picture of bus provision in Herefordshire. But they are bringing out kind of new data technology, and that will improve transparency as we're able to get more data. So this is a council-driven initiative to get more data. Funding and subsidy pressures are rising. So roughly 2/3 of our local routes rely on subsidy. The overspend on home-to-school transport is huge, partly due to limited operator availability, due to the increase in children needing special sort of access to schools, often that aren't in the county as well, and high taxi usage, which we understand the council is addressing at the moment. The BSIP allocation for 2026-27, so this is the bus service improvement plan and the funding that comes from Department for Transport, that has just been announced. So we are going to receive 2 million per year over the next 3 years. And previously it's been a kind of 1-year allocation. So actually to know that we've got that funding over 3 years means that we can actually make provision, or we can plan ahead and build in a bit more stability into the provision. Capital funding has gone down slightly. It was 1.1 million this year, and in the new allocation we're going to get 900,000 annually over the next few years. So there are some key strategic opportunities ahead, which we've recognised. One, of course, is devolution, which could give us greater control over bus policy and funding. The Hereford Transport Hub is an opportunity to restructure some of the city routes and improve the kind of interchange between rail and buses. And there are national developments as well, like the bus services bill, developments in AI, which are going to support data collection and integrated ticketing systems, And so those are all opportunities that we need to kind of recognise and grasp. One of the critical weaknesses that we have identified is in data, which affects our applications for funding. You know, we have to demonstrate value for money. We can barely do that at the moment because we can't collect the data that we need to see where services need support, who's riding them, where the modal shifts are coming. So we've got really inconsistent data on punctuality, usage and performance, which restricts our ability to really plan effectively. Because we're working with a lot of smaller operators in the county, they lack the technology to collect this data. There are new tools, so a city mapper is being utilised across the county, which shows where people want to travel and where the gaps in the network exist. So this is going to help us sort of shape future routes and make sure that services meet local needs. But this we have recognised as an absolute critical weakness that really needs addressing. We've all agreed that integrated ticketing is a high priority. It's something that the public have asked for repeatedly, and I think all the members of the group recognise that that could be one thing that we kind of drive forward that will make a big difference. And this kind of ties into the officers' drive to meet passenger priorities, which are about reliability, frequency and accessibility. And they're launching a new campaign called Making Buses Easier, supported by sort of digital integration. So that includes things like, you know, integrated ticketing, real traffic, I can't remember what they call it, RTI, real information, that sort of thing. Yeah, so live information at bus stops, all the things that prevent people from using buses, take away those barriers, make it easier so that we can drive up ridership. So there's a £1 million capital investment allocated for new and upgraded bus shelters in the current BSIP plan. Certainly in Ledbury, we've already had a meeting with the officers who are going to deliver that, and I think the same is happening in the market towns. That's where
it's happened in Ross as well.
It's happened in Ross as well. That's where that focus is going to be. The new local transport plan does have some really good aspirations in terms of bus priority and infrastructure, such as bus lanes, signal priority, park and choose, that are all going to support the bus provision, enabling buses to move easier through the town. They are aspirational, but we're glad that they're embedded in the local transport plan. We talked about better integration with rail and the new railways bill, and the government's plans for the new organisation Great British Railways could lead to better links between buses and trains. Nick attended for us a meeting of the Marches Forward Partnership, which is taking a collective look across the borders at sort of our integrated transport policies and how they can support that. We weren't entirely convinced that much would come out of it, but it does seem like the right forum for driving forward cross-county initiatives. So, looking ahead, there's a couple of, our next review meeting is in February, when we're expected to get a whole load of information. So I would certainly ask the members of that group to keep looking at the repository, which Simon keeps populating. There's going to be a load more information there. But there is also a bus summit coming on the 20th of January. So we're really pleased that that's being rolled out so soon after the last one in the summer. And David Land has got lots of plans for that, to kind of really share information about how they're looking at their marketing strategy, at their integrated ticketing, all these things that we've been kind of asking about in these groups are going to be discussed at that meeting. The Task and Finish group has also been invited to make a presentation at that summit. So we may possibly be doing that. And so we've got some recommendations that are gradually taking shape, and one of them relates to the £2, which will now be the £3 fare cap, which is such an incentive for people to actually use the buses, but actually only some of our operators are rolling it out. It's up to them to do it. And one of the barriers to doing that is that there's a delay in drawing down the money from Department for Transport. And so there's an outlay cost that some of them find it difficult to meet. So we have wondered about a financial buffer that the council could provide so that they can support that fare cap, and then we can draw down the money subsequently, and we can carry that cost for the few months that it takes, the delay it takes to sort of draw down that money. We're also understanding that the only place really to build competition amongst the operators in the whole bus provision system is at the tender and procurement stage and the contract stage, and that we need to have a really good look at how we can introduce more KPIs and targets and perhaps even penalties into the contract. The officers are really keen not to be these kind of bad guys working with the bus operators, and so on the group we've said we're very happy to be those bad guys and make recommendations to improve the operators' performance. The general feeling we've got is that they are quite passive and receive their subsidy, and we see very little evidence of them making their own kind of marketing pushes to increase their ridership, or even collect the data that we absolutely need in order to focus where our decisions are made. So data gathering is another area where we'll be looking for a recommendation to make sure that we get the data we need. It's clear that the current focus is short-term and operational. That's all the officers have time for at the moment. But the fact that we've got funding over 3 years instead of year by year could enable longer-term planning. But we don't appear to have any long-term strategy for bus provision. A few aspirations, but no real concrete plans that sort of are 10 years ahead. And David Land did share this amazing picture of a straddle bus that kind of moves over traffic queues. And again, it was like hugely aspirational, but maybe...
Yeah, it is. Until you find a tractor, right?
Yeah.
It's a moving tunnel.
Yeah. And we're looking at community transport at the next review meeting, and one of the things we've been thinking about is possibly community transport needs needs representation, currently has no representation on the enhanced partnership, and whether that might be something that we could recommend as well. So that's where we are.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Peabody. Before I give some thoughts on that, do members of the Task and Finish group want to add anything to what Councillor Peabody has said? Councillor Mason.
First of all, just it's unsurprising as a data person, I'm 100% behind this idea that we need more data on it. It's very clear that there's just not been anything like the compliance with the data collection that should be done, let alone the data that we need to be able to show some intelligence in how we understand and manage this stuff. So I'm really grateful for that. My other observation is I think there's quite a lot more to the question of the £3 or the £2 charge than simply the cash flow. I have sight of a report that suggested it was simply not economically viable for most of the providers to be able to offer that, because the government's funding is predicated on an average. The government subsidy of that £3 arrangement is predicated on a national average rather than on the specifics of the journey. So if you've got a number of very long journeys, then the subsidy is not going to be enough to bridge the difference. So although there's been concerns about cash flow and concerns about them not wanting to capture the data required and all the rest of it, there is a real question about the economic viability of us giving that. And I just think we should be cautious that we don't think it's something that we can roll out if it were to require a much higher level of subsidy than we currently see.
Thank you very much for the work that the Task and Finish Study Group has done so far. This is where you as a study group can ask the committee what you need from the committee going forward. For example, at the moment, and we will be going on to our work programme soon, we are committed to getting a final report from you by June. If you feel that is unrealistic, because I don't want this work cut short, because it's such an important piece of work for the council, because it covers so many different goals of the council in terms of trying to meet our net zero aspirations across the county, in terms of trying to provide a different transport option rather than just the car. So this is an opportunity for the Task and Finish Study Group to raise any issues it has with the timetable. So Councillor Pebbody, what do you think?
At the moment, we're meeting our objectives. We're not carrying lots over that we feel is kind of creating a backlog of stuff we've got to see. What we are finding is that as we're getting more into it, we're kind of wanting to go even further into it. Do you know what I mean? So we've started talking about things and it's opening up loads and loads of stuff. So having the flexibility to adjust that schedule is good. What I'm not aware of is if there are any strategically placed decisions that need to be made that mean recommendations in June might be a good idea. I mean, I could check with Philip or maybe Alyssa.
Well, the full council has agreed a local transport plan. It would have been obviously useful to have this study before we actually had the local transport plan formulated, but that would have been one of the strategic links, I would have thought. And with that now having gone, it is a live document. We are told it can be reviewed within the 5 years that it covers. So I now see this particular study as feeding into a review of the local transport plan. And so from that point of view, unless Councillor Swingers is going to say something different, I don't see a time constraint on us from that aspect. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, I think we're you know, in a sense, so to try to meet particular timelines of a plans, it just sets something, gives a kind of a point of stasis. So in fact, all this stuff is moving constantly against the background of also constantly evolving and changing other policies and technology. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about it.
I mean, what we haven't got in our work programme, which I'm really excited, and it's a topic that I'm kind of interested in, is this kind of aspirational look. We're kind of looking at things that are much more short term and that can be delivered in the short term. So it could be that the group are fired up to kind of have another session about, you know, more blue sky thinking, which it seems might be quite useful for the officers because they don't get the opportunity.
I mean, the reason why I'm suggesting flexibility is slightly selfish as well, because when it comes to the work programme that we're going to discuss shortly, there are two major items I want to include in the work programme that are not included at the moment. And one was the one that raised by our resident this morning, which is the strategic environment assessment. Get that right. And the second one is the rail strategy. So we've got two big issues there that we are going to have to slot into our work programme. And really we are constrained by the election next year, the year after next. So we are going to have some movement. I know there's not going to be, I know I gave you a shock. The trouble is we keep getting all this campaign material about the 2026 elections, but it doesn't include Herefordshire, it just includes other people. But the point is, there is going to be some tension in the work programme as to what we can and cannot do. So there is that possibility that we may very well want to give you more time to actually complete your report. The one thing that's missing from all this, and I do think you do need to focus on it, because this is my opportunity to feed back into Task and Finish Study Group. We've had 2 operators go under. The model at the moment is not working. It's not viable. You could talk about bus provision models until you're blue in the face, but if you can't deliver it, then it is a problem. So, in spite of what the officers have said in the past about only looking at franchising, the bus services bill does allow local councils to take over some of their own bus services. I'm not saying it's viable. I'm not saying we can necessarily afford it. But I would like some of that focus going forward to consider what models might be economically viable in terms of delivering a bus service in the county. It's not working at the moment. We're getting these shocks that are happening where the council's then having to struggle to meet the service demand that's suddenly been lost. And I do feel that the Task and Finish Study Group does have to go that step further and look at the models themselves. That's why I think if you're going to do that piece of work as well, that you may need more time in order to come to a conclusion. Councillor Peabody.
There's quite a lot of resistance from the officers about franchising because of not having the kind of skills in-house, which and what we asked at the last meeting was whether, so rather than take over like a huge amount of bus provision, whether we could just run a pilot on a route. And I would like to see that on some of our school routes, only because I think they are the gateway to bus users. They're the children's first experience of public transport, and most parents perhaps who don't ride the buses at all, that's their engagement with the bus service as well. And we've had a few disasters lately, so that's the one service that we've just got to make sure is really reliable. So whether there is scope in running a pilot scheme whereby the council runs a key route, which as far as I can tell, surely must be a commercial route. I still haven't got that information, I haven't got a clear picture of that, but I'm saying surely if you're getting a whole bunch of people from one, at the same time to the same place, that is a commercial route. If any route's commercial, that could be it. So if the council could pilot running one route as a starter and see whether they can build the capacity to actually do more franchising. The fact is, 2/3 of the routes are subsidised, so they're subsidised. We give a subsidy to the bus operators, and the bus operators take all the income because they're subsidised routes, so they're presumably not commercially viable. But I can see how you'd think we might as well run the buses and take the income, the revenue as well, if you're subsidising most of them anyway. But there's a lot of caution. We've been really kind of made to be very cautious about franchising.
But Councillor Peabody, this is this committee's study. Mm-hmm. So it's for this committee to decide what it wants the study to look at. Yeah. And you have my authority today to actually look at that. Because there's no point having a bus model that doesn't work in terms of delivering services. Councillor Mason, and this will be the last point.
Building on Councillor Peabody's observation that we might need to be a bit more strategic about our view, long-term our view. Apologies for what I'm about to say, but we might need to consider at some point driverless buses. And the reason I say that is not that I'm a particular fan of driverless buses, but it was becoming very clear that one of the bottlenecks is actually the staff that maintain these. So if we're looking at, 5-10 years hence, there is going to be a point at which the ability to have driverless vehicles will transform public transport, and we might as well start looking into it because it is being done elsewhere. Our rural sparsity is a real problem for us because it means we've got all these slow run units. We can't run small buses because they still require a driver. You remove that bit of the equation and might just unlock things. So actually, if we are going to open the scope a bit more, I think that might be something we should include.
Well, they're already looking at freight for that as well, HGVs. Thank you very much for that review. As I said, the focal point for the review is this committee, not anyone else. So if the study group has any issues that needs to be resolved, then come to me as chair. Okay? Councillor Stone, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't involved in the review at all, but I'd like to very much welcome the report that Councillor Purvitt has just given us, and particularly welcome the 3-year funding, which I think is going to be so reassuring, really, instead of just 1 year at a time. And secondly, the fare cap proposal, although I notice is £3 now rather than £2. The other thing is the bus shelter upgrade, which is going on in the market towns, and we've had a similar meeting in Leominster and discussing improved bus shelters in various parts of the town, which is really good. My 2 areas of concern, following your discussion, the lack of services in some rural areas, in the north of the county in particular, some of the areas that I cover, there's virtually no bus service at all in some places. There are the school services, of course, but as far as ordinary passenger services are concerned, some villages are sort of left out altogether. And there are a lot of people who don't have, even today, who don't have cars and are very much stuck. They can't get out very much without being given lifts. And the other point is the overspend on school transport services, which is understandable, but probably inevitable. But it's very important with all these extra special needs pupils that we do run services, whether it's taxis or whatever, to make sure that they get their proper educational provision. Otherwise, they're very deprived indeed, particularly in the rural areas. And certainly it's something I hope the Task and Finish group will continue to look at. Thank you, Chairman.
I'm sure you will, Councillor Purvitt, and I think you did actually raise some of those points in your review.
Can I?
Yes.
So at our next meeting, we're looking at community transport and demand responsive transport. And we think that those might be the places where we need to look for solutions for the more rural areas that aren't served by sort of the main bus routes. So, and I think I'm allowed to extend an invitation to anyone who wants to join the meetings. I don't know procedurally whether that's okay, but if it's of particular interest, then yeah, please do come along.
Thank you very much.
I can tell you it's January the 20th.
It's a person-to-person meeting, is it?
The bus summit will be a large gathering of operators, bus users, community transport users and officers, and a big presentation. That's the bus summit.
Yes, where will it be held? Sorry,
Shell store. Yeah, Shell store.
Shell store.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick.
Right, thanks for that. We have less than 30 minutes. I do really want to give us enough time to look at the work programme. I've just asked the clerk to put the current work programme up. Are you able to? While the clerk is doing that, I do think, and it was already in my mind, as I said to the resident this morning who appeared, that I was very concerned about some of the comments that were made at full council on the local transport plan in terms of the strategic economic assessment. I do think there is enough of an issue there that we really, as a committee, do need to give that some priority in terms of scrutinising whether it has been done properly and whether it will actually survive any closer examination if that examination did come about. So I do think we do need to slot into the work programme quite early on a scrutiny of that and call in WSP and officers. And Councillor Swinglehurst, would that be yourself as well?
Be Councillor Price.
Councillor Price. But it's a strategic environmental assessment.
Yeah, but as it pertains to the local transport plan, so.
So you see it's Councillor Price.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we're going to have to slot into the work programme. The other thing I want to slot into work programme, which is more uncertain in terms of timing, but is the rail strategy. As you all know, I've got a bee in my bonnet about reinstating the line between Hereford, Ross and Gloucester. You may ask why. I think there are a number of moves afoot, both nationally and at the strategic level, into the strategic mayoral authorities taking over local rail services, that this might be an opportune time to be far more bold and ambitious in our rail strategy. To have a rail network that has to go north to go south is cockeyed. I mean, our main route should be as direct to London as possible. It just doesn't make sense to be linking us to London by having to go in the opposite direction. But that's what Beeching left us with. So the rail strategy is quite an important piece for me. It's obviously not in draft form yet, I don't think, because it's just come out of the local transport plan. But that is another topic I want to include. And it's right for us to do that because this is about sustainable transport, and rail is part of the sustainable transport options that we have in front of us. But we still have this problem of pinning down officers as to when we will see the LC whip. That's why I was trying to explain to residents this morning that that is something we've been trying to do as a committee in order to put to bed our Act to Travel recommendations from November 2024. We can't put them to bed until we know whether the LC whip covers them off. It's a simple equation, but we just haven't been able to get that slotted in. At the moment it is slotted in for March, and I will be asking John shortly as to whether that's viable. So there's a number of pressures on the work programme that we need to look at. Now, let's look at March. If we were going to do the strategic environment assessment, then I think one of these would have to move. But John, do you think that it's already been published? So there's no real procrastination can happen about it's not available or not. Would 3 months be too short a time to actually ask people to prepare for scrutiny on that?
I was going to ask, Chairman, the strategic environmental assessment has been a part of a decision that the council has agreed. So in terms of thinking about it, in terms of wider scrutiny, it now becomes a plan that the executive will start delivering. So in terms of what you want to scrutinise with the assessment, it's probably worth thinking about the assessment has been agreed as part of the local plan, the local transport plan. So just giving some thought to what you want to look at in terms of its implementation now. So that I was just going to land that sort of question with you. In terms of, I think it would be helpful to help you with your scrutiny to look at what sort of project planning is taking place with the local transport plan in terms of the key initiatives that are going to be coming forward. That may well help embed where the assessment of the assessment, through scrutiny, could be best shaped.
You're not saying that we couldn't do something in March. It's what we do in March that you're talking about, John.
I think it would be worth getting a briefing from officers so that you can see what projects and milestones are coming forward, which would then help inform you as a committee as to when you bring it to committee.
Okay. I want to be more direct than that because it's always useful to have a timescale to bring people's minds to the matter. Just to have it hanging in the air It's something that I'd rather avoid. But if we're not going to have it in March, can we move to June? Because then we'll leave those two as our March topics.
Unless we learn from officers that actually March is a timely time to do it in terms of the delivery.
No, I'm going to put it in June
Okay.
because I'm going to say we're going to do this in June and let them come back to us. Because it does give them some time then to have delivered some of the aspects or not.
Right.
Because we can then see whether those that oppose the local transport plan are right. Because what they were saying was it's inadequate in terms of legal obligations. So if it's inadequate in terms of legal obligations, then what they deliver will be inadequate as well.
Yeah.
And that's what we can scrutinise.
I think it was. I know that most of the comments were based on the SEA being inadequate
Yes.
in terms of, so not necessarily the LTP. And the other question was how we didn't actually get an opportunity to scrutinise the LTP as it in its final draft form. We scrutinised it when it was a document that was half the size of the one that we were then presented with to vote on.
So I want to slot in June, and that will mean moving land use management back, I think. Because I'm not sure we can do both at the same time, unless, of course, we're no longer getting the final report from the Task and Finish study group.
I'm happy to work around your
Fine.
work programme.
So what we'll do then is we'll move the Task and Finish group final report to September, and we'll slot in there instead of that the strategic environmental assessment, delivery of the strategic environment assessment. I know we'll have to work up the objectives, and we're not going to do that today, members, but as you know, I'm always happy to go away, think up some objectives and share them with you. But if you've got objectives, particularly Councillor Peabody or anyone else who was unhappy with the discussion at full council on the local transport plan, if you want to bring them forward, then this is your opportunity to tie up some of those loose ends that you felt hadn't been met. So we're going to move the final report of the Task and Finish study group to September, because I really do want to give you enough time to bottom out some of these key issues, particularly getting a model that works, even if it's a model that is compartmentalised into various different service models. For example, some for school transport, some for some of the difficult to meet rural transport, and some for the major routes that are always economically viable and that you can always rely on commercial operators to run and to actually not go under. So you may be looking at not just one model, but a range of models of delivery. And I do want you to have the chance to look at that, because that is something that is important to a county that is rural. And we've also got to look at the cross-county links as well, because that's very important. And that's where some of the provision might be available if we can do it jointly with some of the adjacent counties. So March stays the same, because they've been in for a long time. I do want to bottom it out. We've got land use management still in June, have we? Yes. And that's been a long time. But we're going to now look at delivery of the strategic economic assessment at the same time.
Environmental.
A strategic environmental assessment. I'm sorry, it's just, it's one of these brain sort of dumps you have where you always think you know what it is and you always say the opposite thing. So strategic environmental assessment.
Yeah, I think we can put that in for January.
Put that in for June, and we will work through exactly what we mean by the objectives. And I do like to have that focus, because then people are going to have to think, what can we deliver by then? And I do believe there was enough concern in full council. I think 13 members voted against the LTP, am I right? Yes. I think it was 13. And 36, 44 and 13 against. That's a sizable number. And we as a committee, in an apolitical way, have to think about what that means for them. And I think we do have to address that. Can we move to September now, please? And what have we got in September? apart from the task and finish study group. Can we put the rail strategy in for September then, please? Again, you may ask, well, are they going to be ready? That's not the point. The point is if you have a target date, then of course that does focus minds. So we could do the rail strategy in September, along with the final report of the task and finish study group on buses. Before we fill out the rest of the work programme, there is my thought about having a task and finish study group on flooding planning, flooding recovery response, and flooding recovery. I mean, it just keeps happening. It keeps happening in parts of the county. It keeps happening in Monmouthshire. I know, Councillor Mason, you were involved in it when you were cabinet member.
Well, if I can, that's also why I asked to join this committee, because I asked which of the scrutiny committees would deal with flooding, and I entirely agree.
At some stage, we will have to think about kicking that off. Can I have thoughts from, because I do know that having two task and finish study groups going on at the same time is probably not advisable. But can I have some thoughts on that? Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, well, I think probably we want this earlier rather than later, because at the end of this winter we shall be focused on flooding, or by that time, rather than kick it down the road to next autumn when people think, oh, well, next year might be a better year.
So, are we looking to start it in March then? And then we're going to have to get people involved in it. We'll need to work on that, Simon. I think we'll need an item in March to see where we've got to in the task and finish study group on flooding. Okay? We've got nothing else beyond September at the moment? No. But we have got some other topics that we have wanted to look at in the past.
This should be a long list, right? I don't think it's on this work programme, but it might be worthwhile us holding another meeting in terms of...
Yeah, I think we should have an informal where we look at the long list.
Yeah, it might be useful to drop something in January.
Are committee members happy with that? We do have a long list of topics that we haven't slotted in yet. We do normally have formal meetings on the work programme, but we also did agree under the new arrangements for scrutiny working that we could have informal meetings, where we, online of course, where we can get together and discuss issues pertinent to the committee. Councillor Mason?
I don't want to sort of argue for the sake of it, but I'm not convinced that there's an urgency for March for a flooding task finish group to commence. My experience over the last couple of years is that flooding actually does vary hugely season from season. And in fact, we tend to be biased to recency. So at the moment, everybody's thinking about what's happening in flooding in the southwest of the county. If we were talking now, a year ago, we'd all be talking about the flooding predominantly in the north of the county. So actually, having those conversations when the flooding's not immediately in your mind is likely to give us a less biased view. So I would not be at all averse to a task finish group on flooding convening later in the year, maybe in the summer when people are less immediately thoughting about it.
We'll move it to the June meeting.
If that's agreed by everybody else.
Okay, we'll move it to June meeting. Okay, but we are now going to have an informal planning meeting on the work programme post-September, because I think that allows us to have the time to focus on how we populate, and what we're talking about is only two further meetings actually, December and March, because beyond March, in fact even March itself, we may struggle to get focus from council members, because we'll all be thinking about the campaign ahead. I mean, it's inevitable, because that's one of the things that does happen. So yes, we'll have to have an informal meeting, which you can put in the diaries for the new year. Okay? Is there anything else on the work programme that anyone wants to raise at this time? I mean, by all means, if you've got topics you want to bring forward, any of you can quite happily send it into, well, it's normally Daniel, isn't it? Daniel Webb
Yeah, Daniel and myself.
Just send it to Daniel or Simon and we'll consider it, because it shouldn't all be coming from me. Because I mean, we are a committee of equals. So if you have got any topics you want to raise, then by all means do so. Okay, Councillor Stone.
Chairman, thank you. I just wanted to very much support Councillor Mason on the flooding issue, because if you all remember, the big flood was in July 2007, when the whole county and Tewkesbury and lots of other places were affected. So I don't think that most flooding, yes, is during the winter, but there is flooding at other times of the year as well. So I don't think that timing is the key issue. But the other thing is that flooding also relates to the first subject we discussed at the meeting today, which was about carbon neutral housing, because with these huge housing developments and all these extra houses, we've got to take into account the impact on flooding. It's a major concern in many villages that the more houses you build, the more risk there is of serious flooding, and this is proved in a number of villages which I could take you to around Herefordshire now.
And of course, the non-planning approval requirement of people being able to convert their gardens into driveways. Because when I explored that subject in my ward, because a tremendous number of gardens have been hard surfaced over for cars because they don't have any garages. I'm told they don't need planning approval for it, which is amazing. But they can have drop curbs and everything. So yes, we'll move the flood into June. We will have an informal planning meeting. And I think that's just about all we can do in the work programme today, Simon. So all that leaves us to do is to go on to item 10, which is the date of the next meeting. I've agreed with Simon it will be the 2nd of March. That's a Monday again, which is our normal day for meeting. If you can put that in your diaries, thanks. And it'll be at 10 a.m. here in Plough Lane. Get in quick, folks, before the other committees do, because often we end up having to meet, for example, on the 16th of December, because everybody else has got all the other slots in early December. And so, yes, getting in early in March means that we can get in there first. And just looking at the time, which I'm going to check. 10 to 1. My God, I'm ahead of time, am I? You'll be delighted, Councillor Thomas. We haven't run over. The time is 12:52. Can we